The gallery fell silent as the auctioneer's gavel struck with finality. Sold for $500,000. My painting, the one my own sister-in-law had called just a hobby at last Thanksgiving, had just become the most expensive piece ever sold by a debut artist at the Henderson Gallery. I locked eyes with Diane across the crowded room, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips, her expression a perfect portrait of disbelief that I wished I could capture on canvas. My name is Eliza Mercer, and for 20 years I'd been hearing that my art wasn't a real career. That moment of vindication had been 2 decades in the making. I still remember the day I decided to become an artist. I was 8 years old, sitting in my grandmother's sunroom while she taught me how to mix watercolors. "Art is how we make sense of the world," she told me, her hands, veined and spotted with age, guiding mine as we swirled blues and yellows together to create a vibrant green. "When words fail us, Eliza, colors speak." My grandmother had been a commercial illustrator in the 1950s when women were expected to set aside careers for family. She never got the recognition she deserved, but she never stopped painting. After she died, when I was 15, I inherited her brushes, each one worn with love and use. I promised myself I would make her proud. By the time I met my husband James, I was working as a graphic designer by day and painting by night. Our tiny apartment had become my unofficial studio, with canvases stacked against every wall and the smell of linseed oil permanently lingering in the air. James never complained. He'd sit quietly reading while I painted into the early hours, occasionally bringing me tea when I'd been standing at my easel too long. "You have something special," he told me one night as I struggled with a composition. "Don't give up." But not everyone in my new family shared his belief in me. The first time I met his sister Diane was at their parents' anniversary dinner. When James proudly mentioned my painting, Diane's eyebrows rose slightly. "How nice to have a creative hobby," she said, somehow making it sound like I collected bottle caps or macaroni art. I never had time for hobbies myself, too busy building my investment portfolio. She laughed, sharing a knowing look with her husband Peter, a corporate attorney with cufflinks worth more than all my art supplies combined. I smiled politely and changed the subject, but something inside me deflated. It didn't matter that I'd sold 3 paintings that month or that a small local gallery had asked to feature my work. In Diane's world, the world of corner offices and business lunches, what I did wasn't legitimate. Over the years, as James and I built our life together, Diane's subtle dismissals became a regular feature at family gatherings. Each time I achieved something with my art, a spot in a group exhibition, a commission, a feature in a local arts magazine, she would nod and say something like, "What a lovely distraction from real life." When James and I decided to have a child, her comments took on a new dimension. "Well, at least now you'll have something meaningful to focus on," she said when we announced I was pregnant with our daughter Lily. The implication was clear. Motherhood was a valid pursuit. Art was not. After Lily was born, I struggled to find time to paint. Sleep deprivation and the constant demands of a newborn left little energy for creativity. For nearly a year, my paints remained untouched, my canvases blank. I felt a part of myself slipping away, and it terrified me. It was James who helped me find my way back to art. He converted our small guest room into a studio and would take Lily for long walks on weekend mornings, so I could paint. "Your art isn't just for you anymore," he told me. "Someday, Lily will need to see that her mother never gave up on her dreams." When Lily was 3, I started painting a new series, large, emotionally charged landscapes that were unlike anything I'd created before. Motherhood had changed me, deepened me, and it showed in my work. I painted whenever I could steal time, during Lily's naps, after she went to bed, in the early morning before the house woke up. At a family dinner when Lily was 4, Diane asked what I'd been up to besides mommy stuff. When I mentioned my new series, she nodded distractedly. "That's nice. It's good to have something to keep you busy while Lily's at preschool." James squeezed my hand under the table. He knew how much those dismissals stung. Later that night, after we'd put Lily to bed, I stood in my small studio staring at my latest painting, a storm breaking over mountains with light pushing through the clouds. "Don't let her get to you," James said from the doorway. "I'm trying not to," I replied, wiping away an unexpected tear. But sometimes I wonder if she's right. Maybe this is just a hobby. Maybe I'm kidding myself, thinking it could ever be more. James crossed the room and took my face in his hands. "Eliza, look at me. What you do matters. It's not just art, it's your voice in the world. And it deserves to be heard." The following spring, I submitted the storm painting to a juried exhibition at a prestigious gallery downtown. I didn't tell anyone except James. I couldn't bear the thought of Diane's polite dismissal if I wasn't accepted. When the email came with the subject line, "Congratulations," I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Not only had my painting been accepted, but the exhibition curator wanted to see more of my work. I printed the email and taped it to my studio wall, a small act of defiance against the doubt that had been my constant companion. The exhibition opening fell on the same night as a dinner Diane and Peter were hosting to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary. When I called to say we couldn't make it, Diane was predictably dismissive. "You're missing our anniversary dinner for an art show." Her tone made it sound like I was choosing to attend a children's puppet performance. "Well, I suppose you have your priorities." "I do," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "This is important to me, Diane." There was a pause on the line. "Fine. We'll see you at Christmas then." The exhibition was a modest success. I sold 2 smaller pieces and received positive feedback from several gallery visitors. More importantly, I made connections with other artists who took me seriously, who spoke the same visual language I did. One of those artists, Maya Chin, had been making a living with her art for over a decade. After looking at photos of my other work on my phone, she gave me her gallery representative's card. "Send him your portfolio," she said. "Your work has something special, a raw emotional quality that's hard to find. People are going to connect with it." I wanted to believe her, but years of Diane's subtle undermining had taken their toll. I carried the card around in my wallet for weeks, taking it out occasionally to look at it before putting it away again. It was Lily who finally pushed me to make the call. She was 5 by then, old enough to notice everything. One evening, she found me in my studio, looking at the card again. "What's that, Mommy?" she asked, climbing onto my lap. "It's a card from someone who might help me sell my paintings," I explained. Her small face scrunched in confusion. "Why don't you call them?" Out of the mouths of babes. I couldn't give her a good answer, and I realized I was teaching her the wrong lesson. How could I tell her to be brave and pursue her dreams if I wasn't willing to do the same? The next morning, I made the call. The gallery representative, Marcus, agreed to look at my portfolio. 2 weeks later, we met at a coffee shop, and he offered to include 3 of my pieces in an upcoming group show. "Your work has an emotional intelligence," he said. "It makes people feel something. That's rarer than you might think." After years of struggling to be taken seriously, things began to happen quickly. The group show led to interest from collectors. Marcus connected me with a wealthy couple looking to commission a large piece for their home. My work was featured in an arts magazine, complete with a professional photo shoot in my tiny studio. Through it all, Diane maintained her polite disinterest. When I brought a copy of the magazine to a family dinner, she flipped through it quickly and said, "How fun for you." When I mentioned the commission, she nodded and changed the subject to Peter's recent promotion. The Thanksgiving before the Henderson Gallery auction was a particularly difficult one. James, Lily, and I arrived at his parents' house laden with dishes I'd prepared between painting sessions. Diane was already there, directing her teenage sons to set the table exactly as she wanted it. "Eliza," she exclaimed when she saw me, "we were just talking about you. I told Mom about your little painting business. It must be so relaxing to have a creative outlet with no real pressure to succeed." She laughed, a tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. I smiled tightly and moved to the kitchen to help my mother-in-law. Throughout dinner, Diane dominated the conversation with stories about Peter's latest corporate triumph and their recent vacation to the Maldives. When James tried to mention my upcoming exhibition at the Henderson Gallery, she skillfully redirected the conversation. "Speaking of art," she said, "Peter and I just purchased the most incredible sculpture for our foyer. The artist is very well established. His pieces usually sell for six figures, but our interior designer has connections." She took a delicate sip of wine. "It's an investment piece, really. That's the difference between art as a hobby and art as a serious pursuit, whether it appreciates in value." I felt my cheeks burning. James placed his hand on my knee under the table, a silent show of support. "I think all art has value," my father-in-law said mildly. He'd always been kind to me. "Eliza's paintings bring joy to people. That counts for something." Of course," Diane said with a wave of her hand. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. It's just that some pursuits are more substantial than others." Later, as we drove home with Lily asleep in the back seat, I finally let the tears come. "Why does she do that?" I asked James. "Why does she need to make me feel small?" James sighed. "Diane measures everything by its dollar value or status. She always has, even when we were kids. She can't understand something she can't quantify." "Maybe she's right," I said quietly. "Maybe what I do doesn't matter." James pulled the car to the side of the road and turned to look at me. "Don't ever say that again. Your art matters. It matters to me, to Lily, to everyone who's ever been moved by one of your paintings." He took my hand. "And someday it's going to matter to people you've never even met." I didn't know it then, but that prophecy was about to come true in a way none of us could have imagined. In the months leading up to the Henderson Gallery exhibition, I worked harder than I ever had before. I painted through the night when inspiration struck, sometimes forgetting to eat until James brought me sandwiches in the studio. I poured everything into a new piece, a massive canvas depicting a woman standing at the edge of a stormy sea, her back to the viewer, her posture both vulnerable and strong. I called it Vindication. Marcus was excited when he saw it. "This is special, Eliza. Really special. I think we should feature it prominently in the exhibition." What neither of us expected was that the Henderson Gallery would decide to include select pieces in their annual charity auction, with Vindication as one of the highlights. The auction typically attracted wealthy collectors from across the country, and a portion of the proceeds would go to arts education in underserved schools. "This could be a big moment for you," Marcus told me. "Even if it doesn't sell for a high price, the exposure alone is invaluable." I didn't tell Diane about the auction. After years of her dismissals, I couldn't bear another polite, undermining comment. But James must have mentioned it to his parents, because 2 days before the event, Diane called me. "So, James tells me your little painting is going to be in some charity auction," she said. "That's nice. Peter and I will be there anyway. We go every year. It's one of the social events of the season, you know." My stomach dropped. Of course Diane and Peter would be there. They moved in exactly the kind of circles that attended charity art auctions. "That's great," I managed to say. "Don't worry, I'll wave to you," she said with a laugh. "I'm sure you'll be so excited just to be in the room with real art collectors." I spent the next 2 days in a state of anxiety. What if my painting failed to sell? What if it went for a pittance while Diane watched? The thought of her witnessing my humiliation made me physically ill. On the night of the auction, I wore a simple black dress that I'd splurged on for the occasion. James looked handsome in his one good suit, and even Lily had dressed up in her favorite party dress to see Mommy's painting in the fancy place before being dropped off at her grandparents' house. The Henderson Gallery was transformed for the evening. Champagne flowed freely. Elegant servers circulated with hors d'oeuvres, and the city's elite mingled among the art. I spotted Diane and Peter across the room. Diane resplendent in an expensive-looking red dress, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in such surroundings. When she saw me, she raised her champagne glass in a mock toast and made her way over, Peter in tow. "Eliza, James, you clean up well," she said, ere kissing my cheek. "I've just been telling everyone that my sister-in-law is the one who painted that interesting piece by the window." She gestured vaguely toward where Vindication hung. I had no idea they included amateur artists in these things. It's so inclusive of them. Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my elbow. "Eliza, there's someone I'd like you to meet." He nodded politely to Diane and Peter before leading me away to introduce me to a curator from a major museum. The auction began an hour later. I sat between James and Marcus, my hands clenched tightly in my lap as various pieces were presented and bid upon. When Vindication was announced, I couldn't bring myself to look up from my hands. "We'll start the bidding at $20,000, the auctioneer said. A murmur went through the crowd. Opening bids for unknown artists typically started much lower. 20,000. A voice called out immediately. 25 came another bid. My head jerked up in surprise as the bidding continued, quickly escalating beyond what anyone had expected. 50,000. 75,000. 100,000. Across the room, I could see Diane's expression shifting from polite boredom to confusion. The bidding continued, a battle primarily between two determined collectors, one on the phone with a representative, the other a silver-haired woman in the front row. 450,000 the phone bidder offered. The room fell silent, waiting to see if the silver-haired woman would continue. She raised her paddle. 500,000. No counteroffer came. The gallery fell silent as the auctioneer's gavel struck with finality. "Sold for $500,000. My painting, the one my own sister-in-law had called just a hobby at last Thanksgiving, had just become the most expensive piece ever sold by a debut artist at the Henderson Gallery. I locked eyes with Diane across the crowded room, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips, her expression a perfect portrait of disbelief that I wished I could capture on canvas. James squeezed my hand so tightly it almost hurt. Marcus was beaming beside me. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew your work was special." The silver-haired woman who had purchased my painting made her way over to me as the auction continued with the next lot. "Elizabeth Mercer?" she asked, extending her hand. "Eliza!" I corrected automatically, still in shock. "Ms. Mercer, my name is Catherine Woodson. I've been following your work since your first group exhibition at the West Side Gallery." I stared at her in disbelief. "That was 3 years ago." She nodded. "I've been waiting to see where your talent would take you. Vindication is extraordinary, the emotional depth, the technical skill, the raw honesty of it. It speaks to me." She handed me her card. "I'd like to commission a series if you're interested." As she walked away, I turned to James, speechless. He pulled me into a tight embrace, and I could feel him trembling. Or maybe I was the one trembling. I couldn't tell anymore. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered against my hair. When we finally separated, I saw Diane approaching, her expression unreadable. Peter followed behind her, looking slightly stunned. $500,000, Diane said as she reached us, her voice faint. "For your painting." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway, still unable to form words. "I had no idea," she continued, her perfectly manicured hand reaching out to touch my arm. "Eliza, I had absolutely no idea your work was valuable." The way she emphasized that last word told me everything I needed to know about Diane. In her world, value could only be measured in dollars. She hadn't suddenly developed an appreciation for my artistic vision or the years of work I'd put into developing my craft. She was simply shocked to discover that what I created had monetary worth. "It always was," James said, his voice quiet but firm. "You just couldn't see it." Diane had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Well, this changes everything, doesn't it? You're not just dabbling anymore. You're a legitimate artist." I wanted to point out that I'd been a legitimate artist all along. that legitimacy wasn't conferred by a price tag. But at that moment, Marcus reappeared with a journalist from an arts magazine who wanted an interview. "Excuse me," I said to Diane, not entirely sorry to walk away. For the next hour, I was swept up in a whirlwind of congratulations, questions, and introductions. Collectors who had never given me a second glance now wanted to know if I had other available works. Gallery owners who had rejected my portfolio in the past suddenly remember me and claimed they'd always seen my potential. It was dizzying, validating, and more than a little surreal. Throughout it all, I kept catching glimpses of Diane and Peter at the periphery of the crowd surrounding me. Diane's expression had shifted from shock to something more calculated, as if she were reassessing everything she thought she knew about me, and more importantly, about how I might now fit into her carefully curated social world. By the time we left the gallery, my feet ached from standing, and my cheeks hurt from smiling. In the quiet of our car, James took my hand. "How do you feel?" he asked. I took a deep breath, trying to sort through the tumult of emotions. "Vindicated," I said finally, a small smile playing at my lips as I echoed the title of my painting. "But also, I don't know. It's not like I expected. I thought if this day ever came, I'd want to rub it in Diane's face. But now that it's here." "It's not about her," James finished for me. "It never was." He was right. The painting that had just sold for more money than I'd made in the past 5 years combined wasn't about proving Diane wrong. It was about the storm I'd weathered, the doubt, the dismissal, the struggle to be taken seriously as both a mother and an artist. It was about finding my voice and having the courage to use it. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice small in the darkness of the car. James squeezed my hand. "Whatever you want, Eliza. For the first time, you get to decide." The next morning, I woke to find my phone overflowing with messages. Catherine Woodson wanted to meet to discuss the commission series. Marcus had forwarded emails from 3 other galleries interested in showing my work. A curator from the Contemporary Art Museum wanted to schedule a studio visit. And nestled among them all was a text from Diane. "Brunch tomorrow? Just us girls. I think we have a lot to talk about." I showed James the message, and he snorted. "Of course, she wants to talk now." "Should I go?" I asked. He shrugged. "That's up to you. But remember, you don't owe her anything." I thought about it all day as I fielded calls and emails, trying to process the sudden shift in my career. By evening, I decided that I would meet with Diane. Not because I owed her, but because I owed it to myself to close that chapter properly. We met at an upscale restaurant downtown, Diane's choice naturally. She was already seated when I arrived, looking impeccable in a cashmere sweater and pearls. She stood to greet me with a hug that felt foreign after years of her keeping a careful distance. "Eliza, I'm so glad you could make it." She gestured to the chair across from her. "I ordered mimosas. We're celebrating." I sat down, feeling oddly calm. "What are we celebrating, Diane?" She beamed at me. "Your success, of course. I always knew you had something special." The waiter arrived with the mimosas, giving me a moment to process her breathtaking rewriting of history. When he left, I took a small sip of my drink and set it down carefully. "No, you didn't," I said quietly. "You've spent years making it clear that you thought my art was a hobby at best, a waste of time at worst." Diane's smile faltered. "That's not true. I was just concerned. Being an artist isn't exactly a stable career path. I was worried about you and Lily." "You weren't worried," I corrected her. "You were dismissive. There's a difference." Her carefully manicured fingers fidgeted with her napkin. "Well, I think you're being a bit sensitive. Family members are allowed to have concerns. Concerns are fine. Making someone feel small isn't." Diane's expression hardened slightly. "If you felt small, that was your interpretation, not my intention." I could feel the conversation veering into familiar territory. Diane refusing to acknowledge the impact of her words, me swallowing my hurt to keep the peace. It was a dance we'd performed countless times. But today, I didn't have the energy for it. Why did you want to meet, Diane? I asked directly. She took a long sip of her mimosa before answering. I thought we could discuss your future plans. Peter and I have connections that could be valuable to you now that you're entering the serious art world. And there it was. In Diane's mind, my 20 years of work, study, and dedication hadn't been serious until last night. Only now, with the validation of a price tag, was I worthy of her connections. What kind of connections? I asked, curious despite myself. Diane leaned forward eagerly. Well, for starters, our friend Martin serves on the board of the Hilton Foundation. They have a substantial art acquisition budget. And Patricia, you remember her from our Christmas party last year. Her husband is the CEO of Westbrook Hotels. They commission pieces for all their luxury properties. I nodded slowly, understanding dawning. And you'd introduce me to these people? Of course. Diane beamed. That's what family is for. And what would you get in return? Her smile flickered. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do, I said gently. You've never done anything without calculating the benefit to yourself, Diane. So what is it this time? The prestige of having an artist in the family? Commission on sales to your friends? Social currency? Color rose in her cheeks. That's unfair. I'm trying to help you. No, I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. You're trying to attach yourself to my success now that I've been validated by the market you understand. But here's the thing, Diane, I don't need your connections. I don't need your approval. I never did. Diane sat back, clearly stunned. I see. I don't think you do, I continued. For years, I let your opinion matter too much. I let you make me question my worth because you couldn't see value in anything that didn't come with a paycheck or status. That's on me, but I'm done with that now. So you're just rejecting my help? She asked, incredulity creeping into her voice. I'm rejecting the idea that I need it, or that I need to earn your respect by becoming financially successful. My work matters because it matters to me, because it speaks to people, because it's how I make sense of the world. Whether it sells for $5 or $500,000 doesn't change that. Diane stared at me as if I were speaking a language she couldn't understand. In a way, I supposed I was. What exactly do you want from me then? She asked finally. I considered her question carefully. Honesty. Acknowledgement that you dismissed something important to me for years. And maybe, going forward, genuine interest in my work because it's mine, not because of what it's worth. She was quiet for a long moment, absently turning her mimosa glass in small circles. I don't think I know how to do that, she admitted finally. Her honesty surprised me, and for the first time I felt a flicker of connection with my sister-in-law. You could learn, if you wanted to. We finished our brunch with lighter conversation, carefully stepping around the raw edges we'd exposed. As we said goodbye outside the restaurant, Diane hesitated, then said, I'd like to see your studio sometime, if that's all right. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. I'd like that, I replied. In the months that followed, my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined. Catherine Woodson's commission turned into a series of 5 large-scale paintings for her foundation's headquarters. Marcus negotiated a contract with a prestigious gallery for a solo exhibition. The curator's visit to my studio led to one of my older pieces being acquired for the Contemporary Art Museum's permanent collection. We converted our garage into a proper studio, complete with northern light windows and storage for canvases. James reduced his hours at work to help manage the business side of my suddenly thriving career, handling emails and scheduling while I focused on creating. Diane and I established a fragile but genuine truce. She came to see my studio as promised, and while she still didn't quite understand my artistic process, she made an effort to ask questions rather than make assumptions. When she hosted a dinner party for her wealthy friends, she invited me to bring portfolio samples. It was a transaction of sorts, She gained social currency by having an up-and-coming artist in the family, and I gained exposure to potential collectors, but it was honest at least. The most significant change, however, was within myself. The validation of that auction night hadn't given me confidence. It had simply revealed the confidence that had been building in me all along, beneath the layers of doubt and dismissal. One evening, about a year after the Henderson Gallery auction, I was in my studio working on a new piece when Lily wandered in after her homework. At 10 years old, she was developing her own artistic eye, often offering surprisingly insightful comments on my works in progress. "Is that for the museum show?" she asked, perching on a stool beside me. I nodded, stepping back to consider the canvas. "What do you think?" She tilted her head, studying it seriously. "I like how the light comes through the trees. It feels hopeful." I smiled. That's exactly what I was going for. "Mom," she said after a moment, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you always good at art? Even before you sold that big painting?" I put down my brush and turned to face her fully. "What do you mean by good?" She shrugged. Like important, like people cared about it. I recognized the question beneath her question, the same one I'd wrestled with for so long. I was always good at art, yes, but not everyone could see that, and sometimes I doubted it myself. "But now everyone knows you're good," she said with certainty. I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. Now everyone knows my work is valuable in a way they understand, with money. But that's not the same as being good. The painting that sold for all that money wasn't any better than the ones I made when you were a baby, or the ones I made when I was struggling to find time to paint at all." Lily's brow furrowed. "Then why did they pay so much?" "A lot of reasons. Timing, the right people seeing it, a little bit of luck." I gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, but mostly because I kept painting year after year, even when people didn't take me seriously. I got better because I didn't give up. "Like Grandma," she said, referring to my grandmother, whose brushes still held pride of place in my studio. "Exactly like Grandma." She thought about this for a moment. "So if I want to be good at something, I just have to keep doing it, even if people don't think it's important?" "That's right, but there's something else, something even more important." I turned her to face me. "You have to do it because it matters to you, not because of what other people think. That's the secret." Lily nodded solemnly, processing this wisdom with the gravity only children can bring to important life lessons. "Can I paint with you?" she asked. I set up a small canvas beside mine, and we worked side by side as the afternoon light slanted through the studio windows. As I watched her, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, completely absorbed in the act of creation, I saw the legacy of my grandmother flowing through me to my daughter. 3 generations of women making their mark on the world, one brushstroke at a time. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected email from a gallery owner in Chicago. He'd seen my work at a collector's home and wanted to feature me in an upcoming exhibition focused on emerging mid-career artists. The theme was validation, artists who had found recognition after years of working in obscurity. I laughed out loud when I read it. After 20 years of painting, I had finally achieved something that even Diane would recognize as legitimate success. But the true validation had nothing to do with sales or exhibitions or reviews. It came from the quiet certainty that had been growing in me all along. The knowledge that my voice mattered, not because others finally heard it, but because I had never stopped using it. The night before the Chicago exhibition opening, I called my mother-in-law to check on Lily, who was staying with her grandparents while James and I traveled. "She's fine," my mother-in-law assured me. "She and Diane are making cookies." "Diane?" I asked, surprised. My sister-in-law rarely spent time with Lily outside of formal family gatherings. "Yes. She came over specifically to see Lily. They've been in the kitchen for hours. Lily's showing Diane how to paint designs on the cookies with food coloring. Apparently it's an art project." After we hung up, I sat on the hotel bed, trying to process this unexpected development. James emerged from the bathroom and saw my expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing's wrong," I said slowly. "It's just, your sister is teaching Lily to decorate cookies as art." James raised his eyebrows. "Seriously?" I nodded, a smile spreading across my face. I think Diane might finally be learning to speak a different language. The next evening, as we stood in the crowded Chicago gallery watching strangers engage with my paintings, James slipped his arm around my waist. "Look at all these people connecting with your work," he said. "This is what you always wanted, isn't it?" I leaned into him, watching as a young woman stood transfixed before one of my paintings, a piece I'd created during those stolen moments when Lily was a toddler. The woman's eyes were bright with unshed tears, her expression so nakedly emotional that I had to look away, feeling almost like an intruder in her private moment with my art. "Not exactly," I replied. "What I wanted was to make something that mattered, to use the voice I was given." Across the room, the gallery owner was speaking to a group of collectors, gesturing toward my largest piece, a new work completed specifically for the show. It depicted a woman in a sun-drenched studio, paintbrush in hand, a child watching from the doorway. I titled it Legacy. "You've done that," James said, following my gaze. "And more." Later that night, back in our hotel room, I received a text from Diane with a photo attached. It showed Lily standing proudly beside a kitchen counter covered with elaborately decorated cookies, her small hands covered in colorful food dye. Diane stood beside her, an arm around my daughter's shoulders, both of them beaming at the camera. The message read, "Lily's been teaching me that art comes in many forms. These may not sell for $500,000, but they're definitely masterpieces." I showed the phone to James, who read the message and looked up at me with surprise. "Well, that's different." "It's a start," I said. A week later, back home in my studio, I began a new painting, a portrait of my grandmother's hands guiding mine as a child, mixing those first watercolors in her sunroom. As I worked, I thought about the long, winding path that had brought me here, about all the voices that had told me what I did didn't matter, and the quiet determination that had kept me going despite them. I thought about Diane, who was trying in her own imperfect way to understand a language she'd spent a lifetime dismissing. About Lily, who would grow up knowing that her voice mattered, regardless of whether the world was ready to hear it. About my grandmother, who had painted until her hands could no longer hold a brush, not for recognition, but because it was how she made sense of the world. And I thought about all the people out there, creating in quiet rooms in stolen moments, in the spaces between responsibilities and expectations, whose work might never hang in galleries or sell at auctions, but who keep creating anyway. They are the ones who understand the truth I had finally embraced, that the act of creation is its own validation. The painting I was working on would never be for sale. It would hang in her home, a reminder to Lily, and to me, that legacy isn't measured in dollars or gallery shows or critical acclaim. It's measured in the courage to speak your truth, to use your voice, to make your mark on the world. Not because others see its value, but because you do. As I stepped back to look at my work in progress, I felt a deep sense of peace. After all these years, I finally understood what my grandmother had been trying to teach me in that sunlit room so long ago. Art isn't just how we make sense of the world. It's how we change it, one brushstroke at a time. And no one, not even Diane, could put a price tag on that.